This is not a story about happy lives. It's very much a film about fear and the sometimes improbable, uncongenial, and unhelpful routes that we take to escape from fear. It's about people who almost obsessively continue to look for the light in all the dark corners.
And dark corners don't hide happy endings. Tennessee Williams wasn't seeking happily ever after in his novella, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, the story on which the movie is based. He was a man desperately trying to put his own demons to rest.
The basis of the film, Gavin Lambert's screenplay for The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, was a novella Tennessee Williams wrote of the same name. And Karen Stone is probably the closest cognate to Tennessee Williams himself. Terrifying loneliness was something that afflicted Tennessee, which is why he could write about it and represent it so powerfully.
Although not initially well received, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone is now appreciated for its finely wrought performances and dark, brooding vision of the despair of growing old alone.
Tennessee Williams felt at precisely that time that he was losing his powers, that he was under the control of excesses that were not helping him, and he was afraid of losing it. And Karen Stone, an actress, unsure that she will still have a career.
What's the difference? I'm just not right.
Nonsense.
Afraid of growing old, whose husband dies, and she's afraid she may no longer be attractive, is the stand-in for Tennessee himself. But it is representative of something very important at a watershed moment in Tennessee Williams' life. And it was also, at the time, considered quite bold.
Tennessee Williams' personal struggles were not the only ones reflected in The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. There is also an uncanny correlation between the emotional struggles of the characters and the real-life struggles of the actors who portrayed them.
It was this art imitating life, imitating art, mirror after mirror situation that probably in a certain way enhanced their performances, and that they were to some degree living some of that off screen. It really was a case of someone whose career trajectory was going up in Warren Beatty, and with Vivien Leigh, someone who was very much, had already crested in her career. She was going through a very difficult breakup with Laurence Olivier, the love of her life, and this was a very fragile time in her personal life and in her career. So she was extremely vulnerable. So each of them really was insecure for different reasons.
Like the conflicted Paolo, Beatty struggled to control his destiny despite the constraints of how others perceived him.
It was a time of uncertainty and of some unhappiness in his own life with where his career was going.
And it wasn't an instant sort of overnight success, as has been the mythology about Warren Beatty. I think there's a sense, because he's so phenomenally attractive and someone who seems to have this ease about him, that everything came easily to him, and that's really not true. He struggled for a number of years in New York as a young actor. He had to drop out of Stella Adler's acting class because he didn't have enough money to pay for the courses. He didn't have enough money really to buy food or take care of himself. He lived in a walk-up that didn't even have a kitchen, and this went on for a period of some years. And then when he sort of arrived on the scene in Hollywood in Splendor in the Grass, there was a sense that he had come from nowhere and became this instant star, and people weren't aware of that sort of background, this period of amazing struggle. And after Splendor in the Grass, he was extremely selective about what picture he wanted to make next. And he didn't want to repeat himself by playing another character like Bud, therefore like Beatty. He wanted to stretch himself as an actor, and he also very astutely did not want to be typecast as just a romantic lead. So when he heard about The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone and this character that was a sort of unsavory gigolo, he thought, well, this is something that I could really sink my teeth into and not be typecast as the perennial romantic lead. At that time, however, it was on the brink of filming. They were actually preparing to shoot in London, and they had already semi-cast someone else in the part of Paolo, the gigolo that Beatty wanted to play. And he found out that Tennessee Williams had casting approval over Paolo, and he borrowed the money for a plane ticket to Puerto Rico, where Tennessee Williams was on holiday, and he stopped, according to his agent Eleanor Kilgallen, to get some man-tan at a pharmacy. He picked up a book on how to speak Italian quickly.
Come si dice rondini?
And while he was flying to Puerto Rico from New York, he was applying the man-tan, reading the book on how to speak Italian, and trying to figure out how he could impress Tennessee Williams. And he knew, having done his research, that Tennessee Williams believed that he had gotten an ulcer from the reviews of his last play, so he bought a glass of milk from the waiter, put it on a silver tray, put a note on it that said, "Anything you want, Paolo." Tennessee Williams laughed at his orange man-tan, and he did a reading for him as Paolo and said, "This is great, you've got the part."
For Beatty, however, winning such an important role brought its own set of issues.
This was going to be yet another one of his really great breaks, and he was very young, and they dyed his hair black. I remember that, to make him, look more Italian. And we were all new at the game,
You know, Renato, these pictures of me are not really so good.
He was sort of a paradox of cockiness and insecurity. There was an insecurity there in that his first film, Splendor in the Grass, had not been released, so he felt that he was an unproven commodity. He was respectful of the fact that he was working with Vivien Leigh. He respected Jose Quintero, the stage director whose first film this was, Lottie Lenya, this extraordinary cast in a Tennessee Williams novella. And then he was as well a bit insecure about playing a part that was so unlike him. Peter Yates, the now esteemed director who was an assistant director on The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, told me that Beatty was very nervous about his Italian accent and that he would confer with his voice coach before each scene.
Why don't you come outside? I show you the 7 Hills of Rome.
The reviews for the film overall were not good. There were some reviews that were better than others, but overall it was not well received. The negative reviews were so damaging to his psyche and so shattered his confidence that he wasn't sure if he really even wanted to act after that. So he turned down this just legion of films that he was offered and really didn't do anything for a couple of years. So it had really a paralyzing effect on his career.
But whatever pressure Beatty endured, it paled in comparison with the struggles faced by Vivien Leigh. Like the aging Mrs. Stone, Leigh was alone and facing the twilight of her life. Her 20-year marriage to Laurence Olivier had recently ended in divorce, and she was fighting the tuberculosis that would eventually claim her life at the age of 54.
I think it's most admirable for its brave performance by Vivien Leigh in the role. I mean that very deliberately. Brave because she was so fragile herself. She only had a half dozen years left to live. She's altogether believable and altogether poignant. You see the combination of desperation, sadness, longing. It isn't easy under the best of circumstances for the strongest and happiest actress every day to go on a film set and portray a woman who's breaking down.
Which may explain the chilly reception she gave Jill St. John, who was playing the role of the ambitious young actress Barbara.
I was a great fan. Who hadn't seen Gone with the Wind? And she was very beautiful, still very beautiful. She didn't speak to me, but she was very beautiful. She didn't speak to me for the entire film. She just nodded, and that was it. For all those weeks. But I got to watch a great actress.
And the intense performances by Beatty and Leigh did vividly portray the meaningless roads down which their characters were headed.
It's not a charming romp about sexual liberation. There's nothing liberated about any of the characters in this story. In that regard, it's kind of a cautionary fable about the dangers of celebrity. whether you're celebrated as a playwright, a movie actress, or a handsome young leading man. This is dangerous stuff. And if you don't have inner resources to cope with that ugliest of four-letter words, beginning with an F, fame, you're courting disaster. This is a perilous, perilous trek for these characters.
Mrs. Stone's final desperate act of throwing her apartment keys to a complete stranger shows the lengths to which Williams' characters will go to numb the emptiness they feel.
And I've heard people say when she throws the key down to this ruffian who's been following her that it's a suicide act because obviously he's going to kill her.
No, he didn't murder her. I don't think he murdered her. Well, maybe somebody would eventually if she kept throwing down keys. I think he was looking for a soft berth. I think he was looking for food and somebody who'd take care of him.
For all of its desperate undertones, the Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone can be seen as Tennessee Williams' attempt to shed light into his own dark corners, to send the message through his characters that he did not find happiness there.
The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, of course, is not only about fear. It's about a failure to find, even to look for, the things that really provide stability and really provide happiness. Nobody in this story does. Poor Mrs. Stone, poor Tennessee Williams. One says this and one discusses it, not critically or condescendingly, but with enormous poignancy and compassion for the pain that the creator of the story and that the characters realize. In that way, of course, the Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone is a highly moral fable, almost moralistic. You feel at the end that you've been taken on a dreadful tour of the underworld, and that's about as close as you want to get to it.